what does the new boss of Ofsted think when the school inspection body's been really hauled over the coals lately? A new year means a new broom at the school inspectors Ofsted. Their new boss is Sir Martin Oliver, and he has been interviewed, grilled, you could say, by the BBC's education editor, Bramwyn Jeffries, who's here. Hi, Bramwyn.
Hello and Happy New Year.
And we're also joined by Calvin Henry, who was the head teacher at St Mary's Church of England Primary in Haringey in North London. Hi, Calvin.
Hello, good afternoon.
Now, you two actually know each other. I'm a bit of a gooseberry here. Bramwyn, explain how you know Calvin already.
Well, Calvin got in touch with the BBC not long after news broke about the death of Ruth Perry and the family speaking out about their belief that her death had been linked directly to an Ofsted inspection of her school, grading her school inadequate, something that was vindicated by a coroner's verdict late last year. But back in March last year, Calvin emailed the BBC and I picked up the phone to him to hear his story because he had been through a similarly incredibly stressful experience and he wanted to share that with us. And we thought the example of what had happened to his school, just in the space really publicly, as far as parents were concerned, in one term, was extraordinary.
And Calvin, I don't want to force you to relive something that was obviously quite clearly difficult for you emotionally and with your mental health, but why don't you just tell us what you want to tell us about what happened?
So, March 2022, we were subject to an inspection. And by the end of day 2, they came to the conclusion that aspects of my school, particularly in relation to safeguarding, simply wasn't good enough. Therefore, they were going to deem the school to be inadequate.
And what was it in particular that the inspectors had, in their view, uncovered that led them to that conclusion?
Well, they said that there were a couple of administrative things which were very fixable very quickly, that needed sorting out, and they were very quick. They could have been done literally within a couple of days, and that they were addressed almost immediately. Particularly around paperwork. And then there were the biggest thing really was there had been a very recent incident between a very small group of boys and girls in the upper years within the school that I personally had been dealing with the children and also with the parents. And it was bad timing because it happened at the same time. It was being investigated by me at the same time that the inspection was taking place. And the Ofsted inspectors, rightly or wrongly, wanted to speak. Well, one of them wanted to speak to some of these children, and they did so. And children waxed lyrical, you could possibly imagine, about some of the things that they'd experienced. So one or two of the girls had experienced from one or two of the boys had said. And the boys admitted to saying what they'd said. And like I said, it was being dealt with very, very robustly by me within the school. And that was the only time we'd ever had that kind of incident that happened in boys and girls. And like I said, it was being dealt with. But nonetheless, the inspectors said that the children had said things that gave them cause for concern, significant cause for concern. And as a result, they believed that there was sexism, racism, and homophobia within that was endemic within my school, which was definitely not the case.
And as a result, St Mary's went from what to what, kind of overnight?
As a result, they said that the school went from good to inadequate overnight.
And so that was the down bit of the roller coaster. You then got on the up bit of the roller coaster.
Well, yes. I mean, the down bit lasted for a very long time, actually, because don't forget this was March 2022. You carry all of that weight of anxiety, particularly in relation to thinking, well, what's going to happen? What's going to happen now? I initially resigned from my post, but the governors refused to accept my resignation because they knew it was an inaccurate finding of the school, and they simply wanted me to fight and sort out the wrongdoing. And so we went through the complaints procedure, Ofsted complaints procedures, stage 1 and stage 2, to no avail. That whole process lasted from March all the way through until September, when the report was published within the first week of September. Then, I'd say about 2 months after the report was published, just 2 months, we had what was called the first monitoring visit of a school that's deemed to be inadequate, of my school, in November. And they turned that monitoring visit into a full inspection. And they determined then that the school was good, as it always was in my eyes.
I was just going to say that when I met you, Calvin, 3 things struck me about your story. One is that as far as parents were concerned, a school had gone good, inadequate, good in the space of 1 term. And how are they to make sense of that when they knew the school and knew that things didn't change so quickly? Also, the weight the inspectors had put on things that had been said to them by pupils, always an important part of it, but a concern that other people have raised with me about how much weight is given to that in the current process. And finally, how little account they seemed to take of the work that was being done in the school and where you were coming from as an experienced head teacher who'd run 2 other schools very successfully before this. I was really shocked when I read your email and then read the 2 inspection reports to see that this was a primary school where they were saying that it was systematically almost racist and homophobic. And then I come and meet you, and you're an experienced black head teacher who also happens to be gay, although I know you don't make a big thing of that in your professional identity. It's not relevant at all. But in this circumstance, the idea that you would not be alive to these issues in your playground just seemed to me, on a common sense basis, to be absurd.
Absolutely. You've hit the nail on the head, Brennan. That's exactly how we felt. I remember the lead inspector giving me their feedback in my office. Well, actually, it wasn't even feedback. He was coming to a judgment about the school even before the 3 inspectors had met to marshal. They marshaled their evidence, to gather their evidence together. But he told me in my office, it's about 3:30 on the Wednesday afternoon, that they would be making the school inadequate. This is before he's even consulted and come to conclusion with the other inspectors.
And that inspector's not here to give their side of the story. And I can imagine if they were, maybe they would say that they were operating within the system in good faith, and that it's not their fault that the system sort of pushed them in that direction. But this is a system that's been inherited, Bramman, by the new guy Martin Oliver. Introduce him to us.
So Martin Oliver is, most importantly, I think, he's a former head teacher, which is very different from his predecessors. So he's run schools, and then he's run a multi-academy trust, so quite a large group of schools that disproportionately has taken on schools that have been judged failing in one respect or another, often in some of the most deprived communities in England. And he's gone in and he's had, it's fair to say, a pretty tough approach. Part of that, controversially, has included having a relatively high rate of suspensions, something I asked him about directly, in which he very robustly defended, saying that you have to have safe places for kids to come to school and parents like it. So he's certainly no pushover. He's taken quite a lot of time over the last couple of months to talk to people privately, taking out soundings. He will have been well aware of the kind of experiences we're hearing from Calvin today and many others from not just his own schools, but also other head teachers and other chief executives who will have bent his ear about the fact that while there are many good people doing inspections and inspections that are seen to be fair and reasonable, there is a widespread concern about consistency and fairness of judgment in the system, and that matters because the stakes are so incredibly high, particularly for head teachers.
And one of the things you bent his ear about, and I mean that in the nicest way, was his response to the concerns raised by the coroner in the case of Ruth Perry. And this is how he responded to that.
I've already arranged that we have additional expert mental health practitioners coming in to inspect and to support all of our inspections, and we will be taking time before we begin our inspections again in the new year to make sure that we have that level of professional training. And it's not just a one-off, it's just the beginning, and it's then going to continue throughout. But really importantly, I need to listen to the profession.
So Bramman is the kind of like the non-Ofstedy way of saying that inspectors will now be trained to take much greater account of the potential mental health impacts of their actions on head teachers and teachers.
They absolutely will, and it's much needed. I mean, Calvin can tell you himself about the profound impact it had on his mental health for months on end. But what they're doing for the first time really is bringing in external advice. So Mental Health First Aid England, which is a not-for-profit, is going to advise and run some of the training. It's starting next week. They're prioritising that, pushing back routine inspections this term by just a couple of weeks probably to get the process underway. But then it will, as Martin Oliver said, be ongoing. And this is really the first time that Ofsted has admitted that it needs outside help, because last year, up to the point where the coroner delivered the verdict that an inspection had contributed to Ruth Perry taking her own life, Ofsted had denied that there was any link between inspection and head teachers' mental health.
And Calvin, I mean, it's difficult to imagine a parallel universe where the inspector in your case had mental health training, but what would be a kinder, gentler, more empathetic version of what happened?
I think if there's simply been some form of acknowledgement of what I, as a head teacher, was experiencing at that moment in time, if there had been some sort of understanding that, okay, let's give you an opportunity to put this right. Let me see, let's determine what might need to be done to sort out these difficulties or these issues that I'm seeing that obviously you're saying isn't evident within you, from your perspective, isn't evident within your school. And there was none of that, really. The inspector, the lead inspector, and just seemed to, yes, they asked about conduct. They asked the questions, are you happy with the conduct of the inspection? So by and large, you're playing the game, you will say, yes, I'm happy with the conduct of the inspection because they're applying the framework. What they don't ask really is the impact that those findings are having on you. And I don't know if you know, Adam, but I didn't actually go to the final feedback session. I was so distraught that the final feedback session I didn't attend. I left school. I was distraught. I went for a 5-hour walk, and I just didn't know what to do. It was horrendous.
Bramman, let's talk about words. Where does Martin Oliver stand on the whole one word to sum up the whole school thing? Because as you and I discussed many times when we were talking about Ruth Perry's case, actually you can have one word that applies to the safeguarding aspects that becomes the only word that applies to the entire school. Indeed,
and the coroner absolutely put this at the centre of not just her judgment on the day, but also in a Prevent Future Deaths report that came out just before Christmas, in which she said, how is it can we have a school where everything is inadequate and it's judged inadequate, and another school where everything is really good, but there are failings in safeguarding that can be fixed quite quickly, but it still gets the same result. And most importantly, the consequences for the head teacher, which is likely loss of job and in many cases end of their career as a head teacher, are the same between those two schools. One that's generally good with some things that can be fixed, and one that's generally really not good at all. So Sir Martin Oliver has no power over that, and that is one of the great challenges he faces. He wants to rebuild trust, he wants to listen more, he wants to get more head teachers involved, all things which have been welcomed today. But he can't make a decision to ditch the 1 or 2 word judgments. that clearly lies with the Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan.
Calvin, thanks very much for coming on and thanks for being so candid about your experience.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
And Bronwyn, thanks for doing an excellent interview which you've shared with us today.
My pleasure.